So can you put up the CT scan? So this patient basically, I tell you in brief, is a 30-year-old lady had been suffering from classical symptoms of chronic rhinosinusitis for more than 2 years. Had been taking intermittently steroids to control her symptoms. When she came to us, we suggested in November the endoscopic sinus surgery, so that, like we discussed in the first webinar, anybody requiring oral steroids again and again to control the symptom with classical symptomatology and signs of chronic rhinosinusitis where the polyps are is the candidate for sinus surgery, so that we can avoid in the future the need of taking the oral steroid, and the patient can irrigate with a topical steroid which can reach deep into the sinuses. That's how this patient was selected for sinus surgery. So once it comes to sinus surgery, as we discussed last time, the radiology has a big role. And we discussed last time as well, to get the best information from the radiology, we should have a complete fine section data in a DVD rather than printouts to get maximum information, dynamic information. So let me run through this. Is the picture good? Is the CT scan picture good there? Isn't it dark?
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Good. It's okay.
Okay. So the CT scan of the paranasal sinuses, what we order is a fine section 0.5 mm, 0.6 mm in all planes and in a DVD. And this CT scan is always shot in the axial plane, and then we can reconstruct with our own software into all three planes. So you can see this was the axial plane which was shot. You can see the slices 0.6 mm. The entire area scanned was around 20 centimeter. And what we reconstruct in three planes is the end product is this kind of a CT scan. And this is what becomes a good teaching tool to the junior colleagues when you have a CT in a DVD, full data on the DVD. You can run in all three planes together for any structure you want to see. For teaching purpose, for learning purpose, you can bring your cursor there and you can see all in all planes where you are exactly. So for chronic sinusitis, again, I would reiterate like last time, the need of the CT scan is not for diagnosis, it is for surgical planning and giving us anatomical details. So here, what information we are getting? See, this picture is a complete whiteout. Once this patient was selected for surgery, she has been under preparation of the steroid and the antibiotic cover, and her polyps have regressed a little bit. I will show the endoscopic picture very soon. And what CT scan we have here is, there are certain information which are best gained from the coronal plane, certain from the axial, certain from sagittal, and we should be able to know this and get all this information truly in the three-dimensional plane for that particular patient. Quickly, as most of the patients, most of the doctors are well versed with the coronal plane. As we get the information in the same plane like we are operating in the coronal plane. So we are well versed with the coronal plane, and we should know how to read the coronal CT scan. So here quickly in 5 minutes, I will run through the scan to touch upon the important points. Feel free to interrupt me any point of time. Job of Dr. Paramita, I know, is the most difficult one. On one side, she is focusing on what I am saying. On the other side, she is collecting the questions from the audience and trying to forward here. So good luck, Paramita. Thank you for the hard work. So this patient's coronal CT file run from anterior to posterior for junior colleagues. You can see in all planes. So in the, see, like I made the picture bigger one. This is the most anterior plane. This is the frontal bone. What you see here, this is nasal bone, and this is the cartilaginous septum and the ala. As I go behind, every time I move by 0.6 millimeter. See the pneumatization of the frontal bone coming with the intersinus septum, which is almost always eccentric. And you see the opacification of both sinuses. That shows the patient has a frontal sinusitis as well. On non-contrast CT scan, what you can appreciate is only opacification. You cannot discriminate into it what exactly the pathology going on. Then the nasal bone, and see the beak. This is the beak. This is one of the most important things to understand the beak. It is a bearing on the frontal sinus surgery, is the biggest obstacle in frontal sinus surgery. If I go back, See in the
Okay, tell Prashant,
sagittal
tell all
plane.
our friends, it's a fantastic book, sir.
See the
Whoever
sagittal plane, how the beak is. If you are working from here to enter the frontal sinus, the biggest obstacle is the beak, and we should be able to see in every concerned patient how thick the beak is, how difficult is going to be the course to enter into the frontal sinus, what is the cellularity in the frontal sinus for that particular patient. We should be able to see. Like in this patient, once we see, the frontal sinus is best seen on the sagittal plane. And you can see each and every cell which is forming the path of blockage to the frontal outflow. So we should be able to know each and every cell. So from here, if I go behind, this beak forms the floor of the frontal sinus. This is something I'm going to relate intraoperatively as well, as this is going to be my biggest landmark for the frontal sinus. We have been showing this for years together and today as well. To understand the frontal sinus, to reach the frontal sinus, to open up the frontal sinus, which is considered to be difficult for surgeons, believe me, if you see three-dimensionally, some structures becomes a child's play. And for frontal sinus here, beak is the obstacle and beak is the biggest landmark as it forms the floor of the frontal sinus. Now, as I go behind, see the beak intact. As I go behind, as the beak goes, the frontal outflow starts. So, from anterior to posterior, if you surgically, when you follow the beak, where the beak ends, the frontal sinus begins. That is how the frontal sinus drains from behind. And you look at the cells in that region which may complicate the drainage pathway. Like for this patient, particular patient here, this cell, this particular cell where my cursor is the obstacle to the frontal sinus drainage. And what you see here on the sagittal plane, this is the big Agarneji cell. See this? The bulla is behind and the frontal outflow is narrowed because of the Agarneji here. And for this particular, it's a cakewalk for the surgeons. If I go behind the Agarneji and fracture it out anteriorly, my frontal outflow will be opened up. So to understand the frontal, the three-dimensional CT is most important. The outflow pattern of the frontal sinus can be studied very easily on this dynamic CT scanning. Now, as I go behind quickly, you have a lot of anterior ethmoidal cells, the bulla, everything opacified. The important thing is, as you go behind the cribriform plate coming in with the horizontal and lateral lamella, and you must see in every case the depth of the olfactory fossa, how deep it is. If it is deeper, you have to stay more careful, more laterally to avoid injury to the cribriform plate. We'll discuss in the complication part. And the important structure here coming down from the cribriform on both sides, either side is the middle turbinate, and it looks like they are also full of secretions or discharge, whatever, completely opacified. So that's how you have to run the CT scan. The idea is to how to go about. Now see quickly as I go behind, the turbinate is moving laterally to the lamina papracia. Turbinate is moving laterally, that is the basal lamella. And as you go behind the basal lamella, all these are postethmoidal cells. And see complete maxillary sinus, everything completely opacified. Pansinusitis, you can say a little bit of the septal deviation behind. As you go behind now, the important thing to differentiate, which I am going to relate surgically as well as to identify the sphenoid sinus. As you go behind, you have to stay more careful as more dreaded complication happens to occur while doing postethmoidectomy and sphenoid walk. And that challenge can be overcome by identifying the sphenoid sinus properly. And I will show the technique how you can avoid all these complications in the simplest manner for the junior colleagues. So here's on CT scan as well. See the entire roof. This is postethmoid and formed by the frontal bone from pterion to pterion. Entire frontal bone. Now as I go behind, see now the frontal bone disappeared. Frontal bone disappeared. What is this bone? The lesser wing of sphenoid. And that's how this is the beginning of the sphenoid sinus. Two sphenoid sinus, the rostrum here, intersphenoid septa, the orbital apex, the clinoid process, and as I go behind the orbital apex, and that is going to be the impression of the carotid artery. These are the pterygoid processes on either side, and you can see the entire sphenoid completely opacified. The whole idea is to just give you a quick idea how to go about the CT scan, how to get maximum information out of it, and we'll use all this information during surgery to get maximum benefit out of it. Though this topic of reading a CT scan is a huge one, I just quickly summarized it for this particular patient, what information we can get out of the CT scan. Any questions here? Any suggestions? Or I would like here to ask one question from Professor Sethi. Does he do anything differently? I know this habit of reading CT scan, I learned from him when I was in Singapore with him. Can we have Dr. Sethi on mic? Professor
Yeah.
Sethi.
Yes, Satish, I'm here.
Yes, boss. Anything different you do?
No, an incredible interpretation of the CT scans. I think when we started off reading the CT scans, we did not have this technology of having triplanar CT scans on a DVD where you have about 1,200 images to go through. In fact, we used to do 3 millimeter cuts and had about 30 images, and that too all in the coronal plane. So, and systematic reading is extremely important, going from front to back or from back to front, that doesn't matter, but we tend to go mostly from front to back because that's the plane that we operate in. So I think CT, what you did is incredible, very nice, and I don't think I need to add anything more than that. The only comment is that what I find is that a lot of people do triplanar CT scans on a DVD. They have 1,200 images there, but they don't know how to read it. So I think doing the scans is fine, but knowing how to interpret that information critically to avoid complications during the surgery, I think is more important. And maybe we can have a comments from Professor Edelstein as well.
Well, good morning. Here in Brazil is almost 8 o'clock in the morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, sir.
Thank you very much, Satish, again. And just a short comment. For me, one of the most important prognostic factor, and especially in frontal recess surgery in frontal sinus, is when you look at the sagittal plane, is look at the IP diameter. If you have a good diameter, and IP diameter, I think is a very good prognostic. If the IP diameter is very narrow, it's very difficult to operate the frontal recess in frontal sinus. If you look at this patient, for example, the IP diameter has a good diameter, so a good size. So probably have a good chance to have a good, very good operation into the frontal recess and frontal sinus, of course. Another very important point, with this new technology, you can do not a coronal section of the frontal sinus, but you can do oblique section in the coronal plane. So you can see all the cell of ethmoid cell inside the frontal sinus. Otherwise, if you use just a coronal cut, a true coronal cut, you cut the cell in different parts. So you have one big cell, you cut in 3 parts, and then you classify type 1, 2, and 3. But the reality is just one cell. This is just a comment about this. For me, in summary, the IP diameter is a very good prognostic factor for this kind of operation.
Dr. Satish?
Yeah.
I will ask Dr. Sethi sir and
Hello?
Dr. Hello.
Hello?
Yeah, just there's so many people are asking how you managed to operate in COVID time, this Corona time.
Oh, okay, boss. I was just washing up, getting ready for the theater, and your question came at the right time, because in this COVID era, we have to have certain more precautions, and we are following the guidelines served by the Ministry of Health from Government of India while operating patients in this era. So, like sinus patients, where you need use microdebrider, drilling, these patients come in a high risk category, and for that you need to wear level 2 PPE, which is what I am wearing now. So level 2 PPE is we have to wear the full body gown with the goggles, with the mask, gloves, and another thing is a facial wiper or something like that.
Okay.
Regarding your questions, using all these guidelines from the Government of India, I've been operating since beginning, since the lockdown period also. But earlier, only essential patients and emergencies and cancers, but now we have started operating routine as well. Though the patient list is very less, we are operating only 10, 12 patients a day, not much. But yes, we never stopped. Earlier, only emergencies, essentials, but now the routine as well, with all precautions.
Did I hear you right? 10 to 12 patients a day?
Yeah, yeah.
My God.
So list has gone down.
Actually, is per day surgeries 40 to 50 per surgeries per day, and that is a normal routine number. Hi, Paramita.
I would like to ask Dr. Milind Kirtanes or what anything he would like to add in this initial few points, sir. In the initial discussion. So unmute. So unmute.
Unmute yourself, sir. Yeah.
No, I think both Dr. Sethi and Dr. Stamp covered it very well. The only thing is my teaching to my students is don't depend on the report that is given to you by the radiologist. Learn to read your own scans and have the scans in the theater. If you find yourself at any point a little lost, go back, refer to the scans and come back, because it's not possible to have the 3D image in your head all the time. And now with what you've got now in front of you makes it much easier. Like Dr. Sethi said, when we started off initially, I remember when I went first to Graz, they were looking at polytomograms, which are some hazy images. Then came the coronal CTs. Now we use them in all three planes. But the important thing is don't depend on the radiologist report. Learn to read them yourself.
Maybe if I can be allowed to add something to that, I think with all due respect to the radiologists, we have advantage over them because we have seen the patients, and we have the advantage that we can correlate the CT findings with endoscopic findings and with intraoperative findings. And this way you can get a complete picture of what is wrong with the patient.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. And to improve the situation, I think we have to make a team with the radiologist. That's what we are doing here, so that you can discuss each and every individual case with the radiologist in case required for any fine details, and you learn from each other. Truly speaking, radiologists in their training, they focus more on the brain and abdomen and thorax, not on the PNS and temporal bone. And they really want, I've seen them, they really want to learn more and more. And we, from the radiologists, obviously want to know more about this technology. So it's a teamwork. It's a teamwork, and we should make a team with the radiologist to get maximum benefit to the patient. Are you getting the endoscopic picture, sir?
Yeah, we can. We are getting it. We are getting it. Beautiful.
Okay. This is the primary picture after the preparation part. This patient has been given 7 days of course of steroids. Antibiotic we didn't give because this is a polypoidal disease. We got certain tests done. As I mentioned in my first webinar, we get a battery of tests before moving on to the surgery. And the test, why we didn't give the antibiotic is our CRP was normal. There's no point in giving all these patients unnecessarily antibiotics. This is not infective disease, mind it. This is inflammatory disease driven by certain cytokines. There is a pathway of cascade of events leading to this disease. So this is the primary picture. I didn't do any intraoperative preparation so far. So the preparation has a big role. I know every time Dr. Sethi used to come to Chennai and would emphasize on the preparation part. So this preparation starts almost a week or even more before surgery. And the need for the preparation comes for the reason of improving the surgical situation. We really want to improve the surgical field so that the bleeding will be less and less, and we should be able to identify the landmarks much better. So the goal of preparation and pre-operatively, as I said, we give a course of oral steroids, not antibiotics in the polyposis. Yes, in the non-polypoidal disease, we do give antibiotics and no steroids and saline irrigation. Okay. Then intraoperative course is equally important to minimize the bleeding. And in general, like we take care of other scenarios, we have to take care of all the aspects of bleeding, the capillary bleeding, the arterial bleeding, and the venous bleeding. In sinus surgery, the majority of the bleeding is contributed by the capillaries and the veins, not by the arteries. So, intraoperative preparation involves the topical preparation as well as the support from the anesthesia side. So, for topical preparation, what do we use? what I'm going to show is our own, how we started. This is the marrow cell. We take 2 marrow cell, divide into 7 or 8 to 10 pieces of different sizes.
Pic is not, video is not there, Satish.
Video is not going?
Yeah, wait,
what happened?
So you do not give any local injection and the nasal cavity.
Earlier I used to give over last 7 years. We have absolutely stopped giving infiltration.
Yeah.
The reason is obvious. This is a benign disease for which we can't afford to take a chance of any complication.
Okay.
Okay, are you getting the picture now?
Yeah, now we are getting it.
How is the picture, boss?
Not previously it was very good. Now it's okay. Focus out of focus little bit, but it's okay now. Okay, it's okay now.
Okay, let me do the white balancing. Let me know the your feedback so that I can do something to improve the picture quality.
Sir, would it be okay if I added a point to whatever you just said?
Yes, yes, Gaurav.
Sir, also preparation of the patient with steroids, it also improves the sensitivity of the receptors to topical adrenaline that we use intraoperatively. So you'll get a better decongestion if you've given them steroids.
Steroids before. Yes, that's a valuable point. So, intraoperatively, are you getting the picture now?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir, we can get the picture.
Yeah, Paramita, how is the picture now?
It's better.
Better?
Yes, yes.
Not very good?
Hello.
Pretty good, sir. It's pretty good.
Hello?
Yes, sir, it is good.
Okay. So my preparation, intraoperative preparation involves something to control the capillary and the venous bleeding. Since the arterial bleeding directly doesn't contribute to it, we don't believe in hypotensive anesthesia anymore these days. I will tell you the reason behind this. Number one, yeah, I will change the telescope and see if the picture improves. So, to control the capillary bleeding, is the picture better now?
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay. So, to control the capillary bleeding, our aim, what we follow is, we use the topical adrenaline soaked in this marrow cell. We use the marrow cell as a vehicle rather than ribbon gauges. This marrow cell is so soft, absolutely atraumatic, and you can introduce in the narrow spaces to open up the space very well. You can use all these pieces differently in different parts of the nose to decongest the mucosa and open up the space. You can appreciate this, how I'm doing. This is marrow cell soaked in topical adrenaline, and the concentration depends upon the medical condition and the age of the patient. This being a young patient, I am using 1:2, and sometimes I don't mind using even the pure 1:1000 adrenaline, only for the topical use, not for the infiltration.
Okay.
And it has been proven, and we have observed in our series of thousands of cases, it doesn't make any difference if your pre-operative preparation is good and give enough time for the intraoperative preparation. So this topical adrenaline, what I'm using with the marrow cell, gives the same effect what you get with the infiltration. The issue is why to take a chance of systemic complication by means of injecting adrenaline, which if disseminates in the systemic circulation can lead to fatal complication, and those have been reported in the literature. So we can't afford to take such chance when you have an alternative using topical adrenaline with the same effect. That's how we are using the topical adrenaline. We are using all those marrow cell pieces, soaking them in the adrenaline again and again like this. If I remove this outside, I will rinse in the saline, soak in the same solution, and use it again and again during the entire procedure. At the end of the surgery, if you need to pack the ethmoidal cavity, you can soak them in the steroid solution and pack the same marrow cell pieces without adding on to the cost. So this is the simple decongestion of the nasal cavity with a topical solution of adrenaline and not using ribbon gauges or anything. The second thing what we do is to keep the head end of the table high by 15 to 20 degrees, the reverse Trendelenburg position, which proves to be something useful by means of facilitating the venous drainage from the head, avoiding venous congestion, and that certainly improves the field. Can you see the picture better now?
Yeah, perfect picture now.
See the middle meatus opened up.
Yeah, very well.
Lips even more shrunken. And
Yeah.
I remember when I told, shown this thing to Dr. Seth in 2005, in 3 days time, he wrote a paper and sent me back that sent this for publication. I liked it. And I hope he has been using since then now. Professor Sethi, are you using this Merocell technique?
Yes, we still using it.
Hello?
Yes, Sethi, I'm still using it.
Still using it?
Yes.
Oh, great. When the boss approves that everything is okay. So he stamps what we have been doing as correct, and this is something proven to be very good in sinus disease. Why we label it as a functional endoscopic sinus surgery? Because our goal is to improve the function, preserve the function, and the function is served by the mucosa and the mucociliary activity. And in any given situation, which I'm going to show throughout the surgical course, we have to preserve mucosa more and more. And this is so atraumatic. We are not going to use anything which is detrimental to the mucosa and the mucociliary system. Like we discussed in the previous webinar, in a regular sinus surgery, we don't use hypertonic saline. We use nowadays more and more ringer lactate, which is more physiological than saline, than normal saline. And this was my preparation. Then the next part of the preparation is equally important from the anesthesia side.
Yeah.
And there are lots of publications, you see, thousands of publications over the last decade, how the different anesthetic drugs can improve our surgical field. And the more and more emphasis on TIVA, total intravenous anesthesia, as it avoids vasodilatation. And at our center, we have been using a combination of sevoflurane and fentanyl, and in between the infusion of either propofol or dexmedetomidine. All have been useful in reducing, keeping the blood pressure under control, and the most important is keeping the heart rate under control. And what we have found now, changing the concepts. Earlier, it was believed that the hypotensive anesthesia is useful. Yes, no doubt about it, it is useful. If you reduce the blood pressure anywhere, the bleeding will be less. But in the elderly patient, in cardiovascular disease patient, or any labile patient, that can be detrimental. Why to take again that chance? And it has been proven that it is the cardiac output which matters, not the blood pressure alone. So our emphasis is more and more reducing the cardiac output, and which is achieved by means of reducing the heart rate. Heart rate is the key factor in reducing the overall bleeding. Anupam ko bulana.
Satish, just a couple of questions.
Yes, please.
If I may ask. One is, how much adrenaline or epinephrine do you use? Do you quantify it, or is it unquantified? One. Secondly, there have been accidents reported where surgeons have accidentally injected the adrenaline, neat adrenaline, into the patient. So do you color it with something like fluorescein or some kind of methylene blue, so that you don't mistake it for something else, and you know that this is adrenaline that you're using?
Yeah, that is important. The labeling is important to prevent errors. Your point is correct, and we have to label adrenaline separately so that we don't misuse it and use it properly. And secondly, to your question, sir, we don't inject at all. There's no question of injecting. Last 8 years, I have not injected for any nasal surgery. Forget about the sinus disease. We are so happy with the topicals, preoperative preparation, and the anesthetist help in minimizing the bleeding. And see how much time I am giving for the preparation. You need to give at least 10 to 15 minutes to give a good field. And most importantly, see, I am using Merocell, very loose Merocell, not tight packing like this. If you pack tightly, it can be counterproductive, giving venous congestion and more bleeding. So all these to be used properly. 60. So my focus and my request to the anesthetist always is to keep the heart rate around 60 to reduce the cardiac output. And this is the most important thing which I expect from the anesthesiologist rather than the hypotensive anesthesia. Though literature supports the use of many other drugs like clonidine and other drugs which prevent the reflex tachycardia, hypertension and all that. But once you are using fentanyl, it blunts all sympathetic response and it works very well in preventing all those exaggerations in the blood pressure and the heart rate. In spite of using this topical adrenaline, see my blood pressure and the heart rate is stable.
Satish, can I just say something here?
Yes, please.
Your point about the reducing the heart rate is well taken. And we normally have a calculation that if you take the mean blood pressure and multiply it by the heart rate, the product of the multiplication, if it is less than 6,000, then you're doing okay. If it goes above 6,000, then you have to tell the anesthetist to do something about it.
Yeah.
If you can get the heart rate down, you don't have to bring the blood pressure down that much. Just make sure that this formula of product being less than 6,000 is adhered to. It's a sort of a yardstick you can use.
Yes, sir. That was a great idea. Initially, a lot of people used to do this, but the only issue is, in that situation, you may sometime end up reducing the blood pressure too low. And it has been proven that if your mean arterial pressure goes below 60, can be detrimental to the cerebral circulation.
So that is why it is better to get the heart rate down so that the...
Yes, blood pressure not too much.
That's right.
We never ask our anesthesiologist to reduce the blood pressure too much. We don't ask for hypotensive anesthesia. We always operate nowadays in the normotensive anesthesia. And that is irrespective of the patient profile, whether it is elderly or young or whatever.
Yeah.
So it is most important for the elderly not to reduce the blood pressure too much to test the coronaries or any other.
So your point is well taken. Rather try and get the heart rate down a little bit so that the bleeding reduces.
Yeah. So now what I have done with the help of microdebrider, I have debrided polyps to get more and more landmarks in view. Can you see that? This patient,
Yes, we can see it.
10 days before, this patient had full of polyps almost coming out till anterior nares. With oral steroid, they have regressed. With this preparation further, see now they regress further, and now we have a complete anatomical picture in front of us. The most important thing, like Dr. Sethi emphasized just now, to prevent complications, it is your field which is most important. Identification of the landmarks intraoperatively is a key factor in preventing complication. So all the time, the emphasis is on visualization, visualization, visualization. And here my marrow cell, see this marrow cell is like a magic. I'm mopping with the marrow cell throughout the surgery, remove the same piece, dip in saline adrenaline or ringer-lactate adrenaline, place it for a moment. Placing the marrow cell for 30 seconds or 30 minutes has same effect. Because the aim is to apply the topical solution. Not tight packing, just applying simply for less than 30 seconds. And the effect remains safe. Even if you apply for the longer period, it doesn't make any difference. So the second thing which improves the field is the constant irrigation. Intermittent irrigation by your assistant to improve the field, to wash out the blood, to improve the picture. Everything is important. Yes, any question?
So the question from Saudi Arabia, Dr. Shashi is asking that he uses Merocil with adrenaline and oxymetazoline. So can you comment on this?
He uses what?
Oxymetazoline.
Oxymetazoline, yes.
Yeah.
A lot of people use oxymetazoline. Believe me, there are certain studies done wherein the oxymetazoline was compared with adrenaline, and ultimately people found in terms of the side effect profile, the rebound congestion and other things, the adrenaline is relatively safer and better than the oxymetazoline. But yes, that's a good alternative. I don't deny that. You can do that. Now, coming to the middle meatus. Now, the most important role in the sinus surgery as far as the landmarks are concerned is the middle turbinate. Can you see the middle turbinate in picture?
Yeah, very clear. No problem.
This is one of the most important landmark which orients you all the time. And not only that, this has to be respected.
Hello, can I just interrupt for a minute?
Yes, boss.
Yeah, Dr. Aldo Stem has just texted me, sent me an image that the host has stopped him towards starting his video. So can something be done about it?
Yeah, Dinesh.
Pardon?
He's
Okay, I will tell Dinesh, he will do it.
Also, disconnected?
Because someone has disconnected here.
Oh, Professor Aldo is disconnected. Wait.
I will ask Dinesh to join him for any issues. Okay. Professor Sethi, can I ask one thing?
Yes.
You have seen you using cocaine. Are you still using?
No, we stopped using it long time back. It's not available in Singapore anymore.
But earlier you used to use cocaine.
We used to use it maybe, I haven't used it for the past 10 years, I believe, or maybe 8 to 10 years at least. I use topical 1 in 1000 epinephrine now.
Okay. We used it in the UK actually. When I did my fellowship, we used it in the UK quite regularly, cocaine.
Yes.
Yeah, welcome, sir.
Now,
Professor Aldo, you want to say something?
Further, I'll take you to the landmarks quickly. So this is the right side nasal cavity, this is nasal septum, this is the anterior part, this is the prominence of the nasolacrimal system, and behind that, this mobile structure, the only mobile structure in the entire lateral nasal wall, is the uncinate process, is the vertical process, and this is the horizontal process. Then this is the bulla ethmoidalis with some polyps coming out of it, and in between them is the hiatus semilunaris, which is leading laterally to the infundibulum. Then this is middle turbinate, the first vertical part in the sagittal plane at the middle turbinate, and this is the concha bullosa we saw on CT scan, and this is full of secretion. See the full of secretions. I can see the concha, and we'll have to do something to it so that it doesn't bother later on. Coina, this is middle turbinate going behind. This is the second part going in the axial plane. Here right up to the roof of the nasopharynx, and this is the nasopharyngeal cavity. I hope the picture is good.
Yeah, very good.
Okay. So now we move on to the surgical part. On this patient, I am going to demonstrate the steps of sinus surgery on only one side, and then we will move on to the next case. I'm not going to demonstrate on both sides the same step repetition. So on one side, what again I am doing is just debriding some more polyps.
Satish, can I ask you, are you using a 45-degree blade?
Yes, RAD 40.
So can you comment on that? Because generally people recommend that we shouldn't be doing any dissection with the RAD 40, but only with the straight blade.
Yeah, boss, I believe this RAD 40 is a versatile blade. I will show you again. In my most of the sinus surgery work, I will be using RAD 40. Though I use a combination of 5 blades. The straight one, 40, 60, 120, and the reverse one, the so-called adenoid blade, which we never use for adenoids. So 5 blade combination for sinus surgery to do a complete job. So now my first part of the surgery will start with the removal of the uncinate process. And you know, this technique again we learned from Dr. Sethi. Earlier people used to use the sickle knife to take the uncinate in toto, but the only fear is the orbit is very close. And if you're not careful, you can get an orbital entry in the beginning, and that can affect your temperament if you get entry into the orbit in the beginning. So what we have been using is the reverse biting. See this? Nagashima reverse biting. Just engage in the hiatus semilunaris, engage completely and turn it down. This is most important. To turn it little down to stay away from the nasolacrimal system and come anteriorly and bite through until you get the hard bone here. And that is most important to prevent complication. And now what I'm doing is, see, this is the upper part of the uncinate and this is the lower part. And what I'm doing is fracturing the lower, out fracturing the lower part, just destabilizing it to get into the maxillary sinus. Can you see this?
Yeah, very clear.
Full of polypoidal disease. So I am just little bit debriding the polyps and opening up more and more space. This is the upper part of the uncinate, and this is the bony uncinate plate. You see the horizontal uncinate?
Yeah, we can see.
So how much are the chances of CSF leak while lateralization of middle turbinate? Dr. Girish from Bhilai wants to know this.
This has always been taught that there is a traditional teaching that not to maneuver much with the middle turbinate. The reason is, we all know, as we saw in the CT scan, the upper part of the middle turbinate, this goes behind to insert on the lamina pepraceae at the junction of horizontal and lateral lamella. And in that scenario, if you try to avoid this turbinate, try to, work more forcefully on it, it can lead to a distal fracture. So you have to stay little more careful, particularly in the upper part. In the lower part, it may not transmit to the cribriform plate, but yes, I will tell you the exact area which is most sensitive in terms of giving CSF leak. When I go high up in the ethmoids, I will tell you, I will keep in mind that in that region you have to be very, very careful. So this is middle meatal, and trust me, you can say, I have opened the maxillary sinus, you can say wash. See the little bit of the cobblestone mucosa in the maxillary sinus, which I am not bothered about right now. And as I said, this is a eosinophilic disease. Our aim is to deliver the topical steroid later. What we need to do surgically is to make sure that that topical steroid reaches everywhere. So we have to open.
So what is the role of Stemberger punch at this level, at the floor of sinus cavity?
Pardon?
What is the role of Stemberger punch at this level? Enterostomy.
Stemberger punch. See, any punch, the role of punch is to bite through. So that you don't avoid the mucosa, you bite through the bone.
Yeah, yeah.
So without traumatizing, without peeling the mucosa off. That is the role of the punches. Wherever you use, the role is same. Was this picture okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
Now this is the upper part of the uncinate.
Yeah, yeah.
So here the most important thing comes at this step. First of all, this is the area where you are closest to the orbit.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful. See now what I am doing. I can remove via through biting this upper part of the uncinate, or remove with a microdebrider as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Your microdebrider should have a good suction backup for the maximum effect. See now, I am removing the upper part of the uncinate.
Yeah, yeah.
Going more and more high up, you can see the bulla completely, and at this point of time, you reach the medial wall of the orbit. That is the medial wall of the orbit here. See this?
Yeah.
And that gives you an idea of the lateral limit of your corridor. Can you see here?
Yeah, very clearly.
Very clear?
Yeah, yeah.
And now I am removing the upper part of the uncinate here. At this point now, I will change to a 70-degree telescope for the reasons I am going to tell you. My bulla is still intact, and that is how we learn from Professor Sethi the advantage of this technique of intact bulla approach. Intact bulla approach means keeping the bulla intact and walking onto the frontal sinus to take the advantage of bulla, like preserving as a solid landmark for the anterior-ethmoidal artery to preserve. I'll tell you how.
Okay, just one comment, Satish. You see that by now you have identified two very important landmarks. Yes, and this surgery is all about identifying landmarks as you proceed in the during the surgery. You have identified the roof of the maxillary sinus, which is a very important landmark, and you have identified the lamina propria, which is a very important landmark. Now, the next landmark that you'll want to identify will be the frontal drainage pathway and then the skull base. So once you have these landmarks in control, you can then proceed with the surgery safely. You can continue to dissect posteriorly, keeping the skull base and the lamina pepraceae in view. Aldo, would you like to make any comments?
Yes, absolutely agreed, boss. This is the surgery of landmarks. This is truly the surgery of landmarks. And the whole idea behind following the landmarks is to carry out safely. See, the threshold of safety in this surgery is relatively less. The relative closeness or I would say the location of the orbit and skull base in close proximity makes the possibility of complication likely.
Satish, I think Professor Stam was going to make a comment, so maybe we should let him make a comment.
Yes, yes, please, please.
Yeah, one for me, the Bulla intact technique. This was described initially in German and then by Mark Lowry and popularized by SETI. I think it's one most important point is to preserve the bulla at the beginning of the operation means a good landmark, a perfect landmark. But in frontal sinus recess you are doing now, for me, one important landmark is the agenase cell. So you should identify the agenase cell. Exactly. In this case, you can see very clear, and especially the medial wall of the agenase. Is the medial wall, I call it the vertical bar. Is usually the frontal sinus drainage pathway is medial to this agenase or posterior to the agenase. So if you identify the agenase, you can enter the frontal sinus very exactly, perfect. So you can enter the frontal sinus very easy. So frontal sinus surgery is the surgery of the frontal recess. It is in summary.
Absolutely, sir, absolutely. And this is a message to everyone. Frontal sinus surgery is the surgery of frontal recess. And for here, the first and the most important landmark is the agenase. And see what I've opened. As I showed on the CT scan, this big cell is the agenase. This is not frontal sinus. The frontal sinus is behind this.
Yeah,
and
perfect.
Here is the role of 70 degree. I'm using 70-degree telescope for certain regions to give me three-dimensional visualization of the limits of the frontal recess. Why people consider frontal sinus surgery as a difficult one? Why they are scared of? The reason is the possibility of complication which this can give. The reason is close up proximity to the skull base, to the orbit, to the anterioethmoidal artery behind. And so the 70 degree when you use and taking certain landmarks in view, you can certainly avoid all these complications. So one by one, number one, keeping the 70 degree in view like this and keeping the middle turbinate in view as your medial limit. See this middle turbinate? If I stay lateral to the middle turbinate, can see this? If I stay lateral to the middle turbinate, I am away from the skull base. Number one. Number two, this is your beak. Let me show you. Give me the debrider. As I showed you on CT scan, the beak is the anterior most anatomy forming the floor of the frontal sinus. See, I'm taking up this wall of the agenase. Beak is the anterior most limit. If you follow the beak and stay between the limits, you are always safe. Let me show something more. Here. This is my medial limit. This is my lateral limit. You see the orbit there. I have shown you already.
Yeah, we can see.
Now give me the marrow cell, my magic, to control this little bit of the oozing so that I can show you better how to exactly enter into the frontal sinus. 120. Exactly keeping all the limits together. If you stay within the limits, you can certainly avoid complications. If I breach my lateral limit, the lamina papracia, I would be in orbit. If I breach my medial limit, middle turbinate, I will breach the skull base. If I keep my bulla intact, see this bulla? This is going up to the skull base. See this bulla? As long as bulla is there, my anterioethmoidal artery is almost always covered by this. Now see the beak is coming into the picture. Can you see? Now, here, let me show you my limits. This is my medial limit, you can see? Can you?
Yeah.
This is my lateral limit, you can see? See
very clear.
That is lamina. That is lamina. And see anteriorly, that is the beak. That is the beak. And see, I am staying between my medial and lateral limits. Can you see very clear?
Yeah, very clear.
And I cannot go anywhere but the frontal sinus. See this is beak, thick beak.
Yeah, very big.
This is beak. So I am staying between the lateral and the medial limit. This is my beak which I am following, and where the beak ends is the frontal sinus. See my frontal sinus up there?
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. See the frontal sinus? What I did initially, again let me show you, this is the most important point for the junior colleagues wanting to do the frontal sinus surgery to settle their fears using 70-degree, number 1. Number 2, keeping 3 landmarks in view. Again, number 1, the medial limit, keep the middle turbinate in view all the time, you can see. The lateral limit, keep the lamina in view all the time. And posteriorly, this is the bulla, which is kept intact to protect the anterethmoidal artery, which runs behind the bulla. I will show you once I remove the bulla, where the artery is moving. And now, in between these 3 landmarks, see this?
Yeah.
This is your beak. I'm following the beak between my lateral and medial limits. Follow the beak in the middle, and where the beak ends is your frontal sinus. Okay?
Yeah, very good.
Now, once you do the frontal sinus work, you have to do a complete work. The reason is the resultant stenosis in the frontal sinus region is more troublesome. And you see the recent International Frontal Sinus Cell Classification, the resultant stenosis, neosteogenesis, fibrosis, closing the frontal sinus outflow is the most difficult, grade 5 to treat. So once you treat the frontal sinus, you have to do a complete job. What we do always is a draft 2A. If, like Professor Elderstem said, you have to work in the frontal recess, then it is type 1. When you work at the frontal sinus ostium, that is 2A. See a lot of polypoidal issues inside. Now, out of all these 4 limits, from here if you see, the safest one is the anterior one. Medially the danger, the skull base, laterally the orbit, posteriorly skull base, and here anteriorly is absolutely free of any critical areas. And that's how the draft has introduced the concept of expanded approaches in the frontal sinus, wherein you remove the more and more anterior wall. See what I'm using here is my punch to show you how you can enlarge it anteriorly very, very safely. This is because this patient has a massive disease. I really want to give a big opening to introduce more and more topical steroids in the post-op period. So
here, very good work, excellent. And I want to just emphasize on the point that all this surgery, you have managed to open the frontal recess so wide, despite keeping the bulla intact. Now, keeping the bulla intact has prevented you from injuring the anterior ethmoidal artery and the skull base. That is a very important point to me.
Yeah, that's what we learned from you, Chief. See now, I am just giving an irrigation. See, there's a lot of mucopus. Still, this opening is not complete. I will show you how much frontal sinus work I need to do in every case. We have standardized here to widen it to the limits. Earlier, people would calculate in terms of millimeters and centimeters. That is, frontal sinus opening should be at least 7 millimeter, 10 millimeter, 15 millimeter. It is all bullshit. You have to enlarge it to the limit depending upon the anatomy of the frontal in that particular patient. And if you reach to the limits and remove all cellular septas, it will not bridge the mucosa to block the frontal recess again. So widen to the limit, whatsoever size is going to be adequate for that particular patient, and then irrigate with the solution. Now still my posterior limit is not widened. Can you see this? Anteriorly, laterally, medially I have reached.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do now for posterior limit is equally important. See, a lot of polypoidal disease inside the frontal. A lot of polyps. See this? I'm just doing a surface debridement.
So can you tell us, for the benefit of youngsters, how do we identify that this is actually the frontal sinus with regards to scalloping and color of the bone?
Having done this in the entire work of the frontal so far, we haven't bothered about the anterior ethmoidal artery. The reason is our bulla is taking care of it. Yeah. As long as your bulla is extending to the skull base, as long as you keep it intact, your ethmoidal artery is taken care of automatically. So now I will show you how this bulla was protecting the ethmoidal artery. And I will see, yes boss.
Yeah, Dr. Deepak Dalmia is asking, what are the indication of doing work in frontal recess area in polypoidal cases, normal polypoidal cases?
In
normal polypoidal cases, when you do intervention in frontal recess area or frontal sinus area?
Yes, we do, depending upon the disease profile. I just said, in this particular patient, who is highly eosinophilic disease, with so much of inflammatory load there, our goal is to ensure that topical should reach in abundance to the frontal sinus. I intend to make a wider and wider opening. I still make wider, but not in every case, depending upon the situation, depending upon the inflammatory load. Now this is bulla. Still I am with a 70 degree. See this? I am behind the bulla. See this?
Yes,
See this space behind the bulla?
Yeah.
I will use my debrider so that I don't avulge anything here. See, I am going behind the bulla, pushing the bulla on one side, just to give you an idea of where exactly the skull base is. See the glimpse of the skull base behind?
Yeah.
See the glimpse of the skull base there?
Yes,
and can you see the artery behind?
Yeah, very clearly.
Yes,
Very clear.
artery.
See how it was protected by the bulla.
Aldo, would you like to make a comment on the intact bulla technique? I think we started it together, 1997. Are you still practicing?
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yes.
yes. Dr. Satish mentioned one very important point in this technique of the bulla. Is the bulla preserve the skull base and the bulla preserve the anterior femoral artery. So you can see anterior femoral artery after remove the bulla, especially the anterior portion of the bulla. And not only the skull base, but protect the orbit as well. So for me, bulla is one of the most important anatomical landmark for operation of the frontal recess. No question about. And I learned it from my great friend, Professor Sethi. Thank you, Sethi, again.
I was waiting for you to say that.
So, boss, see the mucosal preservation. That is most important thing.
Yeah, that is the key. That's the key.
And this micro debrider is the tool for me. I am so used to it. It's the key thing in mucosal preservation for me. See now the entire skull base, the anterior model skull base?
Yeah.
Absolutely clear?
Yes.
Now, give me the reverse one.
See, the only way to protect the anterior ethmoidal artery is to identify it.
Yes.
So you have to identify it in every single case so that you can keep away from it.
Positive identification. Positive identification.
And not to discover it, that you accidentally come across it.
Boss, can you see what blade is this?
It looks like adenoid blade.
Adenoid blade.
Yeah.
This is so-called adenoid blade, but I call it as a skull-based blade. See now why? When I use with a 70 degree, it becomes front-facing. Can you see this?
Yeah, very clearly.
He's using the adenoid blade for the posterior table.
Yes, this is the blade for the skull base. I call it as a skull-based blade, as it becomes front-facing while using with a 70 degree. See this? The entire work of the skull base can be done so safely. The cutting edges are in view away from the skull base, and you can really carry out very, very safely under vision. So this is my work for the anterior ethmoidal skull base. See the frontal sinus therein. I will do something more there. And there is a cell above that is a fovea, and then is the artery, and then behind is the skull base again. And see, again, the same thing, what we started in the beginning about the concept. This is your medial limit, the turbinate. This is your lateral limit. Stay in the middle. Follow the beak. Remember now, follow the beak. Where the beak is the frontal. And see when you're working with a 70 degree, when you're working with a 70 degree up anteriorly, your ethmoidal artery is left behind. It is miles away. On far posteriorly, there's no question of damaging that. And more than that, it is covered by the bulla ethmoidalis. So that's how you can carry out your work in a very, very safe manner. In sinus surgery, the goal is not only to accomplish the surgical part, at the same time is to avoid complications. And like Professor Sethi said, at every point, you need to take one or other landmark in view. One more point.
Yeah, you use this saline irrigation. Exactly what is it? This is normal saline or it's warm saline?
Ringer lactate. I have almost given up the normal saline now.
Yeah.
As it has been proven that ringer lactate is more physiological than saline, as it contains additionally the potassium and the lactates. Number one. Number two, repeated irrigations keeps your surgical field good, remove the mucus also, and makes your life.
You put any antibiotic in this or anything in the solution?
Not at all. Nothing. And for that matter, as you asked this question, is sinus disease overall? There's hardly any role of antibiotics.
That's what I'm asking.
This is not infective disease for everyone. This is inflammatory disease. And this is what the work been done in last 2 decades. Less on the surgical technique, more on understanding this disease. See, some visible polyps with polypoidal mucosa 120. I am going to debride just to reduce the inflammatory load in the safest manner. Though when this mucociliary clearance establishes, then the steroids start going inside. This is going to revert back to normal. But I will still remove some visible polyps to make my life, the life of the patient better in the immediate post-op period. Can you see this?
Yeah.
You don't have to be very, very aggressive about the polyps. You don't have to be very aggressive about removal of the mucosa. See, everywhere, almost everywhere, the mucosa is being preserved. This is functional endoscopic sinus surgery, FES, where the mucosa is going to serve the function. If you remove the mucosa, it will no longer be a FES, it will be mess.
Can I ask one question to Kirtane sir? We have seen his journey from using and doing surgery without debrider, and now he's using. So what is your experience in the last 30 years of doing FES without debrider, then new instrument, now the best quality of debrider? So your suggestions, sir, your points, sir.
I think what he summed it up in one sentence. It's all about preserving the mucosa, and when we didn't have these instruments, mucosa preservation was not easy. First, we were doing it with just ordinary forceps, then we used the through cuts. But the one point I would like to make over here, what Satish demonstrated very well, he was debriding inside the frontal sinus, deep inside. But at every possible time, the tip of the blade was under vision. I think it's extremely important wherever you're debriding, whatever instrument you're using, the tip, there should be no blind, just pushing the instrument inside and debriding. Cutting instruments at every point of time should be under vision. And he showed it beautifully with the 70-degree looking deep inside the frontal, but you could see the tip all the time. That's a point to be noted. You will not cause complications if you keep the tip under vision.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. And now I'm back with a 0 degree. And what I'm doing is removing the remnant of the lower part of the bulla. Here, like Professor Sethi mentioned about the positive identification of the anteriothmoidal artery, I would like to emphasize one more point. For the people who have a fear of damaging the vessel in terms of positive identification, while changing the vessel, I tell you a simple point. See, this is the vessel there with the 0 degree now.
Yeah, very clear.
Now, the fear of this vessel is where the fear is existing about the vessel on either side. If you're working laterally close to the exit from the orbit, where the vessel exits the orbit, if this vessel is transected, can lead to orbital hematoma. That is one of the most feared complications. And another fear is medially where it pierces the lateral lamella. Because there, if you injure the vessel, that injury is good enough to injure the lateral lamella as well and give a CSF leak. So now knowing this fact, what you can do while chasing for the vessel, if you really are looking for positive identification, there is massive disease in this region. Many a times, there is massive disease here and you are not able to identify the vessel. My suggestion is, identify your medial and lateral limit. See this? This is your lateral and medial limit. Stay in the course in the midline and look for the vessel. Even if you happen to damage the vessel, puncture the vessel, there is no fear. Bleeding is hardly an issue in this, anteriothmoidal artery injury. This is such a small vessel having a diameter of less than a millimeter. You pack with a marrow cell, Surgicel, gel form for a minute and it stops. Bleeding is rarely an issue. You can use a bipolar. But if you happen to injure on either side, laterally or medially, can be a big issue. So in those situations, difficult situation, if you are not able to identify the vessel, start finding in the center of your limit so that you don't end up giving a major complication. That is something, an important point in case required to do that. Okay?
Yes, yes, yes.
Now, having done this, the anterior work, we have done the anterior ethmoidectomy, we have done the middle meatal enterostomy, and we have done the frontal sinus work. The next work is the most important part of the sinus surgery before we move on to the next case, and that is the posterior ethmoidal and the sphenoidal work, and which is the major source of dreaded complications of sinus surgery.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
When we talk of complication, we must refer to the Stankovic article, which is the person who has most extensively described the complications. His own complication, his own the learning curve, he described very honestly. In his first publication in 89 or something, his complication rate was 28%. 20 years down the line, his own publication quoting less than 1%. This is how the learning curve, how the experience counts. So the idea is to stick to the landmarks, identify landmarks, and here I will show you our own experience, how to minimize the complications in the posterior part, because now where we are going is the source of major complication. And the same thing, Mosher mentioned 100 years back, the easiest way to kill a patient is a ethmoidectomy, because behind are the important structures, including the carotid artery. So now, for the rest of the work, now my landmarks are, number one, this middle turbinate, this is, we all know, is the first part. There is a concha in it, which I have not dealt with yet. This turbinate is turning laterally to insert on the lamina. Can you see this?
Yeah, very clear.
This is the second part lying in the coronal plane. The first part in the sagittal plane, second in the coronal plane, and third in the axial plane here. So this ground lamella divides the cavity into two anatomical as well as functional planes. The cells anterior to it are draining anteriorly, and the cells behind it are draining behind. That is a very important distinction, because on that concept only we are working, what Master Klinger introduced that time. The drainage system of the sinuses we need to know and understand and facilitate with the sinus surgery. So, in order to go behind this, to enter into the post-ethmoid, number one, now the safety concern starts. For me, for junior colleagues, number one safety concern, take this roof of the maxillary sinus. See this? We call it as a maxillary line, as a life-saving landmark. I will show you, tell you why it is life-saving landmark. So taking this roof of the maxillary sinus as a landmark and drawing a line close to the first part of the turbinate into the ground lamella. I am entering into it, gently I am entering into it with the microdebrider only, into the ground lamella. See now what happens at this point. The post-ethmoidal cells are larger cells. See now I am entering into it.
Yeah, yeah, very clear. Yeah, yeah.
Now at this point I will stay more medially and see something coming into the picture. Can you see something?
Superior turbinate?
Yes, this is superior turbinate. Can you see?
Yeah, yeah.
And some polyps in the recess.
Yeah, yeah.
See now the superior turbinate coming? That, what I am trying to show, I don't intend to dissect the post-ethmoid at this point of time. The only fear is, if I keep on dissecting the post-ethmoids, I may not know when I enter the sphenoid sinus and I end up damaging the critical neurovascular structures there. So I need to develop some checkpoint, some safety point. So what I am trying to show here is, this is what we have been propagating for years and done thousands of cases with this technique. So when you enter the post-ethmoid, the first thing you need to go medially and find the superior turbinate. See that? And medial to the superior turbinate. What do you see? Yes, sir? Now medial to the superior turbinate, what is this? This is the nasal septum.
Yeah, septum, very clearly.
You see? Now I am removing the lower third of the superior turbinate without any issues.
Yeah.
Now at this point, I will take into consideration again the maxillary line. See this? At the level of the maxillary line, medial to the superior turbinate, medial to the superior turbinate and flush with the septum. See where I went? Can you see?
Sphenoid ostium.
Sphenoid ostium.
Yeah, yeah.
I was supposed to do the post-sigmoidectomy, and already I am doing a sphenoidotomy. There is a reason behind it. To enhance your safety, I am trying to develop a landmark. Let me show you. Once I suck out this mucin. The first important thing, see the easiest way to enter the sphenoid sinus for the junior colleagues and the safest way. The reason is, number one, the easiest, go medial to the superior turbinate and go flush the septum. That is most important. Not flushing the superior turbinate, but flushing the septum. Always flushing the septum like this, okay? And this level is important, the maxillary line. The reason being, if I don't consider this as a landmark and keep on going little high up, what is going to happen? See this sphenoid sinus ostium is never at the level of the floor. This is quite high up in the sphenoid sinus. So suppose I don't take this maxillary line into consideration and try to enter the sphenoid sinus high up, I may end up damaging the planum sphenoidal, and that is a disaster. That's why I call this maxillary line as a life-saving line, number one. Number two, once you have opened the sphenoid sinus ostium, this is a great, great landmark for me. I have not completed the post-sigmoidectomy and don't intend to unless I define my landmarks for behind. So what I am doing now, further removing the lower 1/3 of the superior turbinate to widen the sphenoid ostium. Can you see now? Much better?
Hello? Yeah, we can see it.
Now this is the amazing landmark I have got, the sphenoid ostium. The reason is, now I will accomplish my post-sigmoidectomy keeping this as my posterior limit. I will do my post-sigmoidectomy without any fear until I reach the level of the sphenoid ostium.
Yes.
My carotid artery, optic nerve, however abnormal they are never going to come anterior to the level of the sphenoid ostium. And see now, I can accomplish my post-sigmoidectomy with much more safety, much more confidence. Now see, in no time, I can accomplish my post-sigmoidectomy.
Yeah, very clear.
The only thing I need to keep in mind is the level of the sphenoid ostium. So that is to enhance the safety. Now, whatsoever the situation is, maybe ONOD or anything, as long as I don't cross the limit of the sphenoid ostium, that is not going to come behind. Okay? If I don't take this into consideration, imagine, if I don't take into consideration all this thing and keep on doing a post-sigmoidectomy, if there is ONOD or something, I keep going behind, I may happen to damage the optic nerve any time. ONOD is very common. In our country, the incidence is less than what is there in Singapore. I hope Dr. Sethi will agree with me. The incidence of ONOD is very high in Singapore in Chinese population.
It's almost 65%. So we treat every patient as if they have ONOD cell.
Oh, for them, every patient is ONOD cell-like. They have to assume it until proved otherwise. So now see, this is the skull base. You have seen the anterior artery above.
Yeah, we can see posterior.
Now see behind, this is the post-sigmoidal artery, which is quite prominent. It's unusual. It's not very usual to see the post-sigmoidal artery so prominent. The reason being, these sigmoidal arteries traverse through the thickness of the skull base, and the anterior skull base being relatively thinner, they are relatively prominent. Post-sigmoidal skull base relatively thicker. So generally we don't generally see the post-sigmoidal artery traversing there.
Yes, Sandeep.
For the benefit of the juniors, which is more.
Some disturbance is there. Dr. Sandeep is asking, what are indications of doing septoplasty, septal correction before going for FES? When you do the septal correction, or where you do in starting or doing after doing the FES surgery?
Yes, that's an important question. For that matter, I tell you, in my opinion, in my practice, almost every case needs some sort of septal and turbinate correction. And that is a part of the surgery. The reason is, nowadays, the goal of sinus surgery has more and more changed. The goal of sinus surgery more and more is to give access to the topical medications, reaching deep inside the sinuses. So, if this septum, if it is deviated, it may not allow the solutions to reach so effectively directly into the sinuses. Number one. Number two, if my suppose septum is deviated, if I decongest the nose and try to get space and work through the deviated nose, you can accomplish surgery. But what will happen? By means of traumatizing the opposing surfaces, you will end up giving synechia to the patient, and that will defeat the purpose of entire surgery. It will not allow the solution to reach inside. So better to correct the septum if it is deviated. Better to correct the turbinate. See, this turbinate, I am waiting the entire work to do before I do something to this turbinate. I'll do something to this turbinate at the end of the surgery. Why not in the beginning? Because in the beginning I wanted to utilize this as a sole landmark for many regions.
Rajiv, Aldo Stam has been locked out again from his video. Could you just...
Dinesh, please do something.
Yeah, we'll see.
So now we reached the post-ethmoids. Okay? We have done the post-ethmoidectomy. See our limits of post-ethmoidectomy, laterally the orbit, and medially the superior turbinate, the remnant of the superior turbinate. Okay? Now going behind is the sphenoid sinus, and there is a lot of polypoidal mucosa. Now, the standard teaching is you are not supposed to do any sharp instrumentation inside the sphenoid unless you are very sure about it, unless you are very experienced to relate the landmarks three-dimensionally. See what I am doing? Under the close-up, I am widening the sphenoid ostium so as to ensure my topicals would reach inside effectively. As this sinus also contains a lot of eosinophilic disease, wanting steroid 40. See this?
Yeah.
See, this is how preserve the mucosa everywhere. The goal is to preserve mucosa every point of time. I am using the red 40 with keeping the blades towards me to avoid any injury to the vital structures. See this? This is something I don't recommend to the junior people to do. Don't do if you are not very sure where you are exactly working. So now,
can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Professor Aldo Stam has to leave for
Argentina.
And he is giving a lecture to Argentina, I believe.
Yes, I remember. He told me
that promised that he'll come back. He's promised that he'll come back. So Aldo, before you go, if you would like to make a comment, that would be, we will appreciate that.
Yeah, just a short comment. I agree completely with Satish regarding the posterior ethmoid cells. It's absolutely essential to identify first the sphenoid sinus before the posterior ethmoid, because many times the people may be mistake between the posterior ethmoid cell with the sphenoid sinus. So I agree completely with this technique. First, identify the ostium and the sphenoid, and then back to remove completely the posterior ethmoid cells and identify the skull base, of course. So it's really good. I appreciate a lot, Satish. Your technique was fantastic.
Thank you,
I really enjoy a lot, and I learn a lot. And I will be back, I promise.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for sparing your time.
Come back to Argentina, Aldo.
Yeah.
Bring Argentina.
Congratulations. I will inform the Argentinian people about this meeting. So, and then I give the instruction. Thank you very much. See you later.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
We'll do for you, sir.
I'll be back.
Thank you.
I'll be back.
We'll wait for you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So this is about the sinus surgery. The last thing I need to do is something to the turbinate. Now I have number of options. Number one, ready? I have number of options. Number one, to do some Bolgerization, but I have some cell and the disease inside the cell which I can't leave like this. Second thing is, after we said the Bolgerization, is partial resection. Now, in this eosinophilic disease, where you need to introduce your topicals very efficiently into the sinuses in the post-op, this turbinate can be a big hindrance, particularly this floppy with the this thing, concha. Yeah. My first choice would be to do a partial resection, keeping the upper part of the turbinate intact. See this?
Yeah.
This is something works very well, and see the literature which support this. This is a very good strategy in the massive eosinophilic disease patients. See now, the turbinate
Yeah, that's it.
never come in your way in either irrigations reaching to the sinuses, number one. Number two, this is something which will promote your irrigation reaching everywhere, and this will no longer be a hindrance. We utilize the turbinate as a landmark, and in case in future as well, we have left the stump of the turbinate above as a landmark. Can you see that? We have not completely chopped it. Can you see?
People have started using this turbinectomy in all the cases. Do you recommend it?
Not all the cases. If required, if unstable concha, particularly in the massive eosinophilic disease, not in all, wherein your irrigation should not be, hindered reaching to the depth of the sinuses. That is the indication. And massive eosinophilic disease, this is one of the strategies now to partially resect the turbinate so that it doesn't bother hindering the solution reaching. So this is about sinus surgery on this side.
Basic, yeah.
Any questions? We'll take the complications later on. This is what we discussed in last 2 webinars. The goal of sinus surgery, the first one, the indication, and this case, the indication was very obvious. The massive inflammatory load requiring oral steroids again and again to control the symptom was key indication for the sinus surgery in this particular patient. Now, we have opened all sinuses, and now our irrigation will take care of everything. So post-op also, the topical steroid will give for some time, and steroid irrigation will start day after. And hardly any role of antibiotics. You can give a broad spectrum for 5-7 days, otherwise no role of antibiotics. And obviously the post-op debridement and other thing we'll discuss later are the important part of the post-operative management. Follow-up and everything is important. So any question, or we move on to the next case is already ready, that is inverted papilloma.
In this case,
Satish, can I just make a comment here?
Yes, sir. Yes, please, sir.
I think what you demonstrated beautifully, that you went for the sphenoid first. I think one thing to do is to widen the ostium of the sphenoid quite generously and go right up so that you identify the skull base already in the roof of the sphenoid. So then when you come forward, removing the posterior ethmoidal cells, you have a very clear indication as to the level of the skull base. So when you have a lot of polyposis there, going into the sphenoid, going upwards, removing the anterior wall to identify the roof, I think that becomes a very safe way of then tackling the posterior ethmoidal cells and taking them off the skull base. So getting that landmark is important.
Yes, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes.
Please, sir. I have not taken any questions till now, and there are many questions which I'm loaded with. Can you just answer all of them quickly before
yeah, please.
To the next?
Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. So, sir, actually, yes, sir. What is your technique for hypertrophic inferior turbinate? Dr. Ramesh Kapoor from Muscat wants to know this.
Okay, for the hypertrophic inferior turbinate, first of all, it depends upon what hypertrophy it is. It is a soft tissue hypertrophy or bony hypertrophy. For bony hypertrophy, we have two procedures. One is the submucosal turbinate resection, or we do a partial turbinectomy with an edge of mucosa along with. That's it. And that works very well. For the soft tissue hypertrophy, where patients are mostly allergic, we do either a submucosal debridement along with a posterior nasal neurectomy. That is the neural supply to this turbinate tissue. That's a postganglionic supply to the turbinate tissue along with a partial turbinoplasty with a microdebrider, or even cobblator inside the mucosa, submucosal, and that works very well for the mucosal hypertrophy of the turbinate.
Okay, sir. Sir, Dr. Pranita from Warangal wants to know, is it advisable to open all the sinuses irrespective of the disease, or should we just open the disease side?
It was, you see the pre-op CT, it was complete whiteout. It was complete whiteout. Why? What you found less disease is because of the pre-operative preparation. The polyps have shrunken, the disease has, the load has come down because of the preparation, and that made us do so bloodless. See, the field was so good only because of that preparation, and that is very important in terms of giving us opportunity for more complete work, at the same time avoiding complications.
Okay. Sir, when do you decide to excise the middle meatus, the middle turbinate? I mean, when?
Like I mentioned.
Okay, so can you repeat it once again, because many are asking the same question again. Hello, Satish Jain sir? Hello?
Yes. Sir is there. Yes, sir. What's your protocol on post-op care after surgery, sir? Sir, sir can give us the answer. Means after the surgery, what's your protocol, sir? After this, you pack the nose in normal fast cases, or what's your protocol in post-operative care, sir?
No, if like what you saw just now, I don't think there is any need for packing at all.
Okay.
And post-operatively, we would call the patient. You need to do a little bit of cleaning. Sometimes there are blood clots that you find, so fibrinous adhesions. You just want to make sure that you clear that out. And then after about a week or 10 days, we would start them off on nasal rinsing and the nasal steroid sprays. But doing a cleaning once or twice as required is important to prevent blood clots from remaining there. And especially if you've created some raw areas, and that is important to make sure that you clear it out. Otherwise, you're likely to get adhesions.
So we used to do lots of vulgarization in all these cases, or suturing also. So
if you feel that you have destabilized the turbinate a little bit, if you feel that it's a little floppy, then it would be a good idea. I normally just take a stitch through the turbinate to hold it. If the turbinate is as stable as he has put it over there, there was no movement of the turbinate, then you may not have to. But we would vulgarize it if you felt that the turbinate was a little unstable.
Okay. Paramita, you asking?
I want to know what about the anterior ethmoidal artery bleeding from Dr. Sethi as well as from Dr. Kirtane sir. We want to know how will you manage if there is a bleeding with the anterior ethmoidal artery?
Sethi, would you like to take that?
Hello?
Yeah,
am I audible, boss?
Wait, Dr. Sethi is giving some answer.
Yes, sure. I think most of the times I don't think we completely transect the artery. And most of the times either a little bit of oozing from there or is it a partial tear in the artery. I've never come across someone who completely transects the artery and it retracts inside the orbit. At least I haven't seen it. So when you partially transect it and there is bleeding, the first thing to do is, of course, to recognize it, that it's happened and not start panicking. Just keep your cool and pack it. Pack it with maybe with epinephrine, either diluted or in 1 in 1,000. Hold the pack, hold your breath, and then get hold of a bipolar. Get a bipolar and then very gently, by the time you have got your bipolar and you have packed for about a few minutes, you'll find the artery constricts and the bleeding, although it doesn't stop completely, but becomes less. And you are able to identify the tear in the artery and then bipolar it. And once you bipolar, you'll find the bleeding will stop. And all this will take barely about 3-4 minutes. And if you don't panic, if you panic, then of course it can take much longer. The important thing here is not to use a monopolar. And I had one instance where someone used a monopolar and it trying to stop the bleeding caused a CSF leak by causing a defect in the lateral lamella. So in trying to control one problem, he had another problem. So important thing is not to use monopolar, but bipolar to stop the bleeding. So that's how I would do it. But if there is let's say a complete tear, it never happened to me, and the artery retracts back inside the orbit and you develop an orbital hematoma, that's a completely different ballgame. And I think we'll talk about that a little later. Even worse situation is, I haven't had it myself, but I have one case that a colleague of mine in US encountered it. Not his case, but it was transferred to his facility. Professor Scott Graham lent me that case, and the artery actually retracted inside the brain. And they didn't find out about it till the next day when the patient was unconscious, and then the CT scan, and the artery had retracted inside and with profuse hemorrhage in the anterior cranial fossa. and that patient required a craniotomy.
So that's a message that once you are dealing at the level of the skull base with the vessels, you have to be careful so as not to allow them to retract inside the cranial cavity.
Absolutely.
That can be a disaster. Yes, and we have a case today. Meningoencephalocele will emphasize that particular point, because in that surgery also the vessels coming through down through the meningoencephalocele can be the source of problem if not taken care of. So can we move on to the next case or any further questions?
Oh, sir, that there is few more. We need to know about the balloon sinuplasty. Do you do it for frontal sinus? Balloon
Not really. I gave my opinion about the balloon. In brief, it cannot replace the sinus surgery, number one. It is not a scientific answer to the problem. We discussed 4 hours first day about understanding the disease. The goal of surgery is redefined. This surgery is not a mechanical. You can't tell your patient that I'll remove your polyps, I'll operate and you'll be all right. It is a medical disease for which the medical treatment begins after that. That facilitates the medical treatment. By means of enlarging some sinus little bit, by breaking the septation a little bit to drain the sinus is not the answer for the future. So that cannot work, and majority of such patients are coming back with the problem. I tell you, that's why this has gone to disrepute at majority of the centers. The cost along with I am not discussing, but even the basic fundamental is something which is never so appealing. But it has certain indications. In my practice, if you ask me, for pediatric patients having isolated sinusitis like empyema in the maxillary sinus, sometime you can use the balloon with the minimal trauma in that region, because the pediatric patient are not going to do any douching like adult patient post-operatively very judiciously. In immunocompromised patient with some isolated sinusitis to drain, like HIV patient, you can use balloon. In post-operative situations, sometimes some sinus is bothering, which has gone, stenosing, you can use balloon to time being deal with that. Otherwise, as a standard practice, it has no role in my practice, as a standard rule.
Yes, Satish, I think that's a very important point, understanding the pathology, understanding the disease that you are dealing with. And that is actually an evolutionary process, because we keep on learning more and more things about the disease, and we keep on basically changing our techniques of dealing with the surgery at the same time. So you've got to keep up to date with the literature if you have to understand, if you want to understand the disease.
Sir, Kirtner sir would like to have your opinion as well on the balloon if you are using.
No, I was never very fond of it. I don't think I subscribe to that idea. But Satish, I think the comment that you made is very important here, that we are treating a medical disease. So the surgical treatment is not to cure the disease, it's the starting point of the medical treatment. And I think the ultimate answer to this problem is going to come from the medicine guys. Surgery is just the facilitation of reaching the medicine to the site. And of course, when the patient is obstructed, to give him symptomatic relief.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. Paramita, any more? Next case is ready. That is inverted papilloma. All set. Induce. Absolutely ready. And I am all set with the radiology. If you have any quick questions, we can.
One question, very good question from Dr. Leena Jain. What is the best approach to deal with isolated posterior ethmoidal sinus disease?
Isolated posterior ethmoidal disease.
Yeah.
See, isolated single sinus disease most often is a mycetoma. Most often is a maybe sphenoid sinus, maxillary sinus, even posterior ethmoid is mycetoma. And mycetoma is one aspect of the fungal disease where fungus is not initiating an immune reaction of the patient. It is just collecting and increasing and obstructing the sinus, the drainage. That's it. And you have to remove that isolated fungus. It is not any part of any systemic disease, so you don't need to treat all sinuses. You just go there, open up that sinuses, remove the antigen, that is fungus, remove that and establish the ventilation drainage. That's it. The minimal, that is something where the role of minimal sinus surgery stands.
Also, what is the Uncinate process attached to the skull base? What different technique?
Yes, that's important. And for that, you need to go first to the radiology pre-op very well to understand where the uncinate is going by 3-dimensional radiology. And if it is going to the turbinate and skull base, like I removed uncinate today with a micro debrider, sometime I fracture with a curate, go behind and fracture it entirely. You can't afford to do that. In that situation, it is best to use a through biting, to bite through the uncinate, to separate it from the critical areas and then make your openings better, rather than pulling it out or doing anything else.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. So before you start with the next case, can you just show us externally your setup? Because in this COVID situation, they all want to know what precautions are you taking. There are many ENTs who want to know.
Okay. In the next,
almost
I
50
was
patients are there.
I was about to show in the last case, but we went along with the discussion, so I couldn't. In the next case, I will show it properly. Okay, definitely.
And
Okay.
sir, before we start the next case, to once again tell us the exact adrenaline concentration along with the lignocaine that you use. There have been many doubts on this again.
Okay, I will tell in every case because that is different in every case. The last case, it was 1:2, being a young patient. The next case, papilloma is again young. In all cases, I am not going to infiltrate anyway, and I am going to use the adrenaline, younger, more and more concentrated, only topical.